Hi everyone, and welcome back to Mission 1820. In this week's episode of Have You Ever Wondered? In case you're just joining us, we've been in a series called Books of the Bible, and we've been giving introductions into each book of the Bible in just 5 minutes or less. So, without further ado, let's get into this week's book. This week we're in the book of Romans. Now, this is the sixth book of the New Testament, but it's also the first of the 13 New Testament books that were written by the Apostle Paul. Now, not only is the book of Romans one of my favorite books, but it's also theologically the most important of all of the epistles that were written by Paul, mainly because it's his most comprehensive as well as logical presentation of the gospel. Also, this book is responsible for the conversion of three really important men in history. The first was Augustine. He was a 4th century theologian who was converted. We have Martin Luther. He was a 6th century monk before his conversion. And then close to 100 years later, we've got John Wesley. Now, he was converted after reading Martin Luther's commentary to Paul's epistle. As for the author, we know that it was written by the Apostle Paul in the winter of AD 57 in the city of Corinth. Now, the book of Romans is only 16 chapters, but as always, we'll go ahead and break it down into 3 main parts. Part 1 is the revelation of the righteousness of God. This is in chapters 1 through 8. Part 2, this is the vindication of the righteousness of God. This is found in chapters 9 through 11. And then finally, we have part 3, which is the application of the righteousness of God in chapters 12 through 16. Now, the book of Romans is the most formal and systematic of all of Paul's letters, with the main theme being that righteousness comes as a free gift of God and it's receivable by faith alone. Because as you read the book, you're going to see that Paul declares his main theme in chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, saying that the gospel is the power of salvation to everyone who believes. But the key phrase being in verse 17 when he says the righteousness of God, because this verse encapsulates the very heart of Paul's letter. See, Romans was written in order to show how sinful men and women can receive the righteousness of God by having faith through his Son, Jesus Christ. But of particular concern to Paul was that he was writing to those in Rome who were loved by God and were called to be saints. See, because Paul himself was a Roman citizen, he had a unique passion for those who were believers in Rome. And since he had not yet visited there, this letter essentially served as his introduction to them. The primary theme running through Paul's letter to the Romans is the revelation of God's righteousness in his plan for salvation, or what we call the gospel. You see, Paul emphasizes that everyone stands in need of God's grace, and this was apparent in the case of the Gentiles, or those that were non-Jewish, who instead of worshiping the Creator were actually worshiping the things that he created. But on the other hand, the Jews, in spite of their belief that they were superior to the Gentiles, well, they were also spiritually bankrupt because they knew the revealed will of God, and they judged others by it. But they failed to see that they were being condemned by the very law under which they were passing judgment. So why is the book of Romans important for us? Well, Romans makes it clear that there is nothing that we can do to save ourselves, and only through the grace and mercy of God can we be saved. But perhaps the best application of Romans for each of us to apply in our own lives, that's in Romans chapter 1, verse 16, when it tells us not to be ashamed of the gospel, but rather we are to be faithful in proclaiming it. Now, with that, I hope that this introduction is going to get you started in the book of Romans. So God bless, and thanks for watching.